Hey everybody, welcome to the third episode of Gong Labs Live. My name is Devin Reed, your host, and what we're doing is every week at Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific, we're bringing you tips, tricks, and best practices to help you be as effective as possible. And so before we dive into today's episode, if you're a return viewer, go ahead and you like the episode, of course, obviously you wouldn't be back, go ahead and tag a friend in the comments to share the love, or you can reshare on LinkedIn, whatever you prefer. Also, we have a new way that you can reach out to us if you want to suggest some content, have some great feedback. Email us at gonglabs@gong.io. Now, before we dive into it, I got to introduce you to our guest, Tanner Robinson.
Not Chris Orlob, Tanner Robinson. Great to be here. Super excited. I feel like I'm on the Today Show. Just great to have an at-bat here.
If this was the view, I guess that makes me whoopee. I'm okay with that. And so before we get into today's episode, which is all about objection handling, I had to bring in Tanner Robinson. Tanner is the co-founder of SDR Huddle. He was the most successful BDR here at Gong, ran the BDR team with I think about 15 direct reports at one time, and most recently made his way over to the AE role. So I thought no one better to cover objection handling. Before we get into some tips and tricks, Tanner, I'd love just to know what made you start SDR Huddle in the first place?
It's a great question, Devin.
Thanks.
So SDR Huddle started the same way as Google, Dell, IBM, all the greats. It was in a basement. It was in a garage. No, but really it wasn't a basement. It was with one of my former bosses, Brian Vidal. Hopefully you're watching right now and you're very proud of me. But really what I saw was LinkedIn started to take off. More people started to have a voice on there, started to create their brands, which is so important.
Yeah.
And what we identified was there was a shift in sales development happening. And what was happening was more SDRs were on LinkedIn talking about their experiences. But a majority of the time it was SDR leaders, it was VPs. It wasn't giving a voice to the front lines, the people that are pounding the phones every day, sending the emails, just fueling the revenue engine. So what we did was, let's see if we can start a blog. We can get a few people involved and say, hey SDRs, let's write about a few topics that you care about most, to get them in front of people, to give them a voice, to use it as leverage to help them build that brand. And at first we had a few people writing for us. I got to write an article, my boss did as well, and it slowly started to catch on like wildfire, and it's been pretty incredible to see and,
it's awesome.
And really, really feel great to be a part of.
That fires me up. I'm excited. Well, great. And so today what we're going to cover is objection handling. It's not just going to be on the BDR front. I'm an AE. You're a new AE, so I'm sure you've got punched in the mouth a couple times in the last few weeks here. And so all we're going to do is break down some of the key insights of how you can be better at objection handling. And before we dive into it, would love to hear from you guys on the audience. What are the objections that you run into most? So go ahead and put it into the comment bar. We'll be able to circle back to them and address them as well. But before we do so, objection handling. Why is it so important for salespeople?
That's a great question.
Man, another one, another zinger.
When it comes to sales, when I think of objection handling, it's really the ability to recognize over time that something is coming and the ability to overcome it, to accelerate a deal, create a strong partnership. And it's very important to be able to identify those moments as sales professionals. The way I think of it too is we probably have a few athletes listening to, in baseball, there are a few different pitches. You have a curveball, which bends. You have a fastball that's very straight. It's much easier to hit the fastball.
Yeah.
But an objection is like a curveball. And how do we get to a place where we start to recognize that curveball is coming? They're going to tip their pitch a little bit. Same way a prospect will tip and show their hand a little bit in objection when they say, hey, I'm not interested. So we need to dive a little bit deeper, overcome that so we're more successful.
That definitely makes sense. It sounds like also that having seen the same pitch or the same objection a couple of times makes it easier to overcome. Is that fair?
Oh, most definitely.
All right. And so I think in the AE realm, the reason it's really important is you're going to need to master this because one, it's going to happen on every deal. I'd argue on every call, you're going to run into an objection. If you're lucky, it's one that you've heard before. You should have that kind of in your tool belt. You should know the main, probably 10 to 20, depending on your business, that you're going to get asked or that is going to be brought up. So make sure that you have good answers for those. And then I think some of the things we can cover in a couple of minutes is how can you best handle ones that you've never heard before. Those times where you're caught on the ropes after 3-4 punches of key objections, or you feel your foot slipping because you just got caught on your heels in what you thought would be a smoother conversation. And so before we get into that, what do you think are like the main reasons? Why do people struggle with objection handling?
I think it's really two areas. Number one is psychological. It is not comfortable to stand your ground and object to, say, an executive at a company.
Okay.
Think about it, from the SDR realm, you could be 2 months into a role, you call it up an executive, they kind of punch you in the mouth a little bit, say, hey, I'm not interested, you think you nailed the pitch. At that moment, you have to be psychologically strong and feel comfortable objecting. The second place would be just overall sales acumen. The best way to overcome, like you mentioned, is really acquiring that tool belt to the 15 to 20 objections that you face most often.
Yeah.
And if you refine those skills over time, then the sales acumen is going to go up. You're very comfortable on the phones. You're going to be able to knock it out of the park 10 out of 10 times.
Yeah. I think success breeds confidence, right? So once you get a couple under your belt, you know that you can handle it. And it definitely makes sense. Even if you're not an SDR, if you're an AE, it can be challenging sometimes knowing someone on the other line has 30 years of experience, has probably mastered objection handling themselves, and has probably eaten reps like you for breakfast a few times. So it can be a psychological thing, but luckily there are some tips and tricks that we have for you guys. And so the first one we'll get into is the pause. Yeah, a little strategic there. And so what top performers are doing, according to the Gong Labs research, is before that they jump in and try to respond, they let themselves pause. How long do you typically pause? And I guess, do you pause? Do you agree with that?
Have to pause.
Have to pause. Now, after the pause, the goal of it is to kind of collect yourself, right? There's no need to jump in right away and get nervous or speed up your words per minute. Take a pause, collect yourself, and come up with a really good response. What do you think that ideal response would be?
So it's important to, number one, mirror the language of the prospect. So if they say they're not interested, it's important to point that out and mirror that language back to them, and then ask a loaded question.
There it is.
You don't want to jump right into addressing that objection with how your product is way better than what they're objecting to.
But it is better.
I mean, yeah, but you want to ask that loaded question so you can start to dive a little bit deeper in that objection. There's shallow, there's deep objections, but let's get another layer deeper so then we can have a more meaningful conversation of how we can impact their role in their business.
That makes sense. I was going to say the next tip is to ask a question, because what's really common is you hear something, you think you know the answer, but really you think you know the answer because you think you know what they're really headed, but you can be misaligned on that. Yeah. So when you say ask a loaded question, for the viewers that might not know what that is, what's a normal question and what do you consider a loaded question?
So I would say a normal question is very closed-ended. Okay. It's a yes or no answer. So it's someone's like, I'm focused on other things. Then you ask them like, actually, do you know what Gong does in retrospect? Have you ran across us? And if they're just like, yes or no, that doesn't really allow you to, hang a little bit longer against the ropes and battle this person. You need to ask an open-ended question.
Understood. So if someone says, hey, Tanner, not interested, I use your number one competitor, the better thing is to say something along the lines of, I don't know, how are you using that competitor? What are they missing? Versus, are you open to looking at new solutions? Feel right?
Yeah, definitely.
I like it. So we've got mirroring, we've got asking questions and pausing. Another good one is labeling. Now, labeling is really interesting because it's not really a question, but it's a way that you can start to extract what they really mean from that objection. Can you jump into labeling a little bit? Is that something that you even use?
Don't really use it. I think you'd probably be better at addressing this one right here.
Sure. And so what it will do is if someone says, and we're kind of going off the cuff here, it's live, is when someone gives you an objection, is start to understand something that they're really getting at, right? And so you can label it. We covered it last week in Discovery. Is start to label that emotion. Hey, it sounds like your current product might be missing something. If we uncovered what that was in Gong, in our instance, Gong could address that, is that something that would be of interest? Now that's off the cuff and you can kind of get an idea here of where we're going. There's also a few things to definitely not do when we're doing objection handling. And so as I'm getting some input here, let's go through some common objections. This might be interesting. Do you mind if I kind of rapid fire a few and see what you got? All right,
sure.
We're putting them on the spot. It's in the hot seat here. So some common objections that we're getting from the audience is send me an email. Let's go cold call first. We'll do the cold call version.
Let's do the cold call version. You get to the end of the pitch, they're like, send me an email. Honestly, there's an avenue I take. It's, I could spend time talking about and asking, what do you want to see in that email? But most importantly, it's important to put your SDR hat on and push back attack there and say, where did I miss the mark? Why aren't you interested today? And how can we get to a place where you see value in Gong?
Absolutely. I love it. What about the too expensive?
Oh, my favorite one. I think when you get to a place where it's too expensive, maybe no one's had a line item for your solution. It's a brand new space like Gong. Maybe they don't understand the value. I think it's always important in that moment to make sure you did some good discovery and identifying what those pain points are, and then addressing, say if it's ramping new hires faster or trying to generate more revenue, if you're able to tie that back to, this is too expensive, and kind of shine a light on how you can address those pain points, they're more open to spending because it's such a big problem to them.
I agree. And I think later down the sales cycle, if you're on the AE front, is if someone says it's too expensive, there's probably a miss earlier in your sales process where you didn't drive enough value. And that could be a couple different things, right? One is, did you really do some uncovering of business needs early in the sales process? And have you adequately addressed them with your product or solution? If you haven't, then it will view too expensive because they're looking at a price tag and they're not seeing the value that's going to address the things that they're working on. Another good one, and we can keep it pushing here, is let's see, this one's specific to you. Can you address getting past the gatekeeper?
Oh, yes.
What do you do when you get the gatekeeper? There's a variety of gatekeepers out there.
Number one, it's the human element goes a very long way when you're talking to a gatekeeper. You are talking to another human being. This is someone that sole job is to stand in front of the gate, almost like Gandalf on the bridge, saying, "You shall not pass," so they do not get to their executives. I think what's important is be very open, honest, direct with the gatekeeper. Have a reason for your call. Show a little bit of research about that person you're talking to, and that'll allow you to get to that next step, which is having a conversation with that executive.
Perfect. That's great. And let's see if we can find one more. There is a ton coming in. If you have more objections, feel free to throw them our way. Let's see. The gatekeeper. Actually, you know what? I'm going to jump on the gatekeeper because there's a different version when you're later in the sales process, which is, let's say you get past Gandalf. No offense to gatekeepers if you're watching. It's a compliment. Is later you're working with executives. They have EAs, executive assistants. And their job is also to guard the schedule of the person that they're reporting to. And I was going to say, when you touched on the humanistic approach, you're right. Someone's job is to prevent you, but their job is also to let you through if you earn it, right? And so it's the same thing as always be kind to them. Always make sure that you treat them like a person, and don't just demand things from them, because what also executives are going to do is they're going to ask that EA, hey, how's it been working with Devin? What's he like?
Yep.
And if they come back and go, hey, that guy's a jerk, they will cut you off at the knee and they'll never respond to you again. However, if they say, oh, he's been really kind, he's been really persistent, they know that you really want their business and you're going about it the right way. You'll earn a lot of trust in the meantime. All right, let's go back to our list. If you have more, feel free to throw them over here. Let's see, just scrolling here. Oh yeah, so we talked a lot about what to do. What are the big don'ts? The big things you should not be doing when you're trying to objection handle?
You don't want to be combative. You don't want to just go straight for the throat and be direct and just say why.
But why?
I just paused on purpose because that's going to allow me to overcome this objection.
Perfect. But combative, so I know I kind of threw you off there. Why not use why?
It puts them in a place where you're interrogating the prospect. They should never have a sense that you're on the other line, you have a checklist, you're asking them why. It's very abrasive. You want to put them in a place where you want to help them solve a problem, not just check a list of, well, why? It's very, very intrusive.
Yeah. And there's a couple ways you can go around it. Instead of saying why, is what caused you to do that in the first place, right? Don't say, why would you do that? That's I got defensive saying it to myself. So there's other ways. Remember in our last episode around discovery, you can ask questions around what or how. How did you make that decision instead of why did you make that decision? What led you to purchase X technology instead of why did you purchase that technology? So before we get into the last question for Tanner, audience, if you have any questions that you would like us to address before we wrap up, please put them in the comment bar now. We're going to take a few minutes to make sure that we go through all of them. This one's much easier for you. I would love to know one or two stories, if you happen to have them. What is the toughest objection you've overcome, and or the funniest, because people like to laugh?
Oh man.
What's the toughest one? I want to know the toughest one, then we'll get funny. If you can share it.
Toughest one was a few companies ago, called an executive. It's an absolute great fit. All the SDRs out there, it checked all the boxes when it came to ICP. Executive, round of funding. No, I didn't use the round of funding in my research when I talked to him because everyone else was probably doing that. And he said, hey, we just moved forward with a competitor 2 days ago. So that's just a gut punch. That's someone I've been going after for such a long time, weeks.
And you've been teeing it up. It felt good. You probably told a couple people next to you that you're about to get it.
I got him on the call. I stood up. I had a headset on, Jabra headset, high-fived my boss, and I'm just like, oh, ghost white. Man. So what happened at that moment is important to you have to take your sales hat off at that point. And what I did was, okay, I can't ask you how the experience has been because it's been 2 weeks, but what factored into coming to this decision? He opened up what the business pain was, and in my mind, I wanted to just ask one simple question, which was, did you already sign?
Oh, wow.
And he said, you know what? No one's actually ever asked me that, and we haven't signed. And when I said I went with a competitor 2 days ago, it means I chose them as the approved vendor.
That's
but
awesome.
Based on this conversation, I think I should give you guys an at-bat.
Wow.
And was able to actually close in a day. After we got him same day close.
Wow.
Got him in the door. And I think it's just using that humanistic approach, addressing the elephant in the room, like, hey, I know you just went with them, but did you sign? I think it's a great angle you can use.
Well, I think it touches on what we talked about earlier, which is asking a question first. Someone said I went with them. They didn't say that they signed, but people are going to assume, oh, the battle's lost. They already picked them. I think you asked a clear-cut question, and it obviously struck a chord, and then you won the business later. So great story. Any questions coming in from our producer? We'll see if they come in. Last question for you, a funnier version, if you have a more interesting phone version that we can end with.
So we've probably all dated someone. You have a few exes out there. So actually, one of the first SDR calls I was ever on, I called someone, and it was the ex-girlfriend of the VP of sales I was trying to reach.
Yikes.
Curveball.
Screwball.
It was a made-up pitch.
Yeah.
Honestly, it was so hard to overcome that objection. I just had to step back and be like, I am so sorry.
Yeah.
I was trying to reach, Mr. VP of sales. I didn't mean to call you directly.
Yeah.
And she was really welcoming and warm. She was actually like, oh, here's his direct line, and here's his favorite sports team. You should probably mention that to him.
Wow.
So she actually helped me out. I mean, a little bit of a strange objection, but
unusual
at the same
gatekeeper,
time,
but it worked. Perfect. Well, that's awesome. Any last words of wisdom you want to share?
I think just one last point here is objection handling is difficult, and you need to recognize that. And repetition and practice is extremely important, from role playing to listening to people that are doing it really well. But you really just need to anchor in, and just the attempt of overcoming the objection, it gets easier the next time you do it, and then you continuously move on from there.
Well put. Remember, it's psychological. Make sure that you're taking a pause, letting yourself gather yourself, and then also ask a good question. And then as you start to run into them more and more, you'll get more comfortable with it. And then by using all the approaches that we talked about today, you won't get caught on your heels as much. You won't find yourself on the rope trying to find a way out. So that is our show for today. Quick reminder, Professor Orlob will be back next week, and we'll tease on Tuesday. We have a video coming out letting you know what we're covering next week. Don't forget to hit follow on LinkedIn, at Gong LinkedIn. You'll get a notification every time we go live. And if you enjoyed today's episode, again, please do share, tag your friends in the comment bar. Thank you again, and that's all the time we have for today.